Good afternoon, everyone. This video is brought to you by Adapt 2030 patrons, Patreon. Guardian, Arctic's strongest sea ice breaks up for the first time on record, but then look at the next statement down. Usually frozen waters open up twice this year in phenomenon. Is it the first time on record, or is it the second time this year? Waters north of Greenland are normally frozen even in the summer. See, they're trying to explain away the gaining sea ice. The narrative is changing. That little sliver of coastline off of Greenland, you see where it's blue in the left slide compared to where the ice is sometimes in the right slide. Guardian article even shows that we're coming into the 5th, 6th, 7th least amount of ice, could be 8th or 9th by the time the finish of the summer rolls around. They never talk about the underwater volcanic activity in that area of northern Greenland. And that tiny little hook at Greenland where they say it's the first time ever, oh, it happened last year too. But I guess it'd be way too inconvenient to talk about all the sea ice that has returned back to Antarctica. And during these times, as the yields decrease, which we're seeing already, you're definitely going to need to start to grow some of your own food. You should learn how to do it right now while you have the capability to make mistakes and your life's not on the line. TrueLeafMarket.com, heirloom and organic seeds for any grow zone on the planet. That Adapt 2030 link is below in the description box, as well as the links to tonight's stories and images. Also, the weekly podcast, Mini Ice Age Conversations, more in-depth analysis and commentary on the intensifying grand solar minimum. Links are in the description box as well. Just click. It'll bring you to the newest episode, number 91, where I talk to Lee Wheelbarger about volcanic ash in the air and slight dimming that's occurring right now in our planet's atmosphere. And you knew it was going to come. They would have to switch the narrative from global warming to global cooling, and just trying to figure out how they're going to do it. And here's another example of the breadcrumbs being dropped in front of you. The Guardian, Arctic's strongest sea ice breaks up for the first time on record, yet the very next statement, usually frozen waters open up twice this year in the phenomenon. Okay. Could be first, could be second. Now see what they're showing here also. The narrative before was all the sea ice is melting. We're going down to less than 1 million square kilometers, and it's going to be a sea ice-free Arctic. But now look, they shifted it. Waters north of Greenland are normally frozen even in the summer. Now last year or 2 years ago, you would have never heard this statement. They're trying to now shift the narrative to explain more sea ice. Now it's not about the coverage anymore. It's about there's strange winds blowing ice away from some shoreline that's only 50 to 70 miles wide by a couple hundred miles long. It is such a sliver of what's happening that I can't even believe that they're focusing on this. I even highlighted it in yellow. The ice is being pushed away from the coast by winds. It's not the gaining sea ice and bringing us up into the 7th or 8th least amount of ice in the melt season this year. Contrary to what we were told would go to lower and lower and lower and we'd come down to less than 1 million square kilometers, we just gained an enormous amount of ice this year. And see, what's funny is even in that first paragraph, Walt Meyer from the U.S. National Snow and Ice Data Center, otherwise known as NSIDC, says on average it's over 4 meters thick and can be piled up on ridges as high as 20 meters thick. Now wait a second. Like I said 2 years ago, you never would have heard them claiming 4-meter thick ice in the summer in this Arctic. Impossible. Impossible. You know what the narrative was. Sea ice melting, ain't no polar bears, everything's gone. And here they are, well, it's normally 4 meters in the Arctic in the summer. Yeah, right. Good switch on that one. But anyway, in the article, they do have some links out to some Twitter feeds showing you the animations here. They're using the Sentinel satellites. They're trying to prove that the winds are strange and this ice is doing something strange. Full ice coverage. The winds have moved a couple hundred miles of ice along a coastline. Let's put them side by side to really see what they're trying to show you in this scare article here. And the whole time in the article, they're talking about ice vectors, etc. This is just readings of the ice, which direction it's moving. A vector. Well, let's take a wide out on the map, because I really want you to get a glimpse of this. They're trying to blow completely out of proportion, like this little tiny sliver of the northern coast of Greenland is somehow proving the entire Arctic Circle from 70 north to the North Pole is affected by this little sliver that you can barely even see registering in northern Greenland there on this full ice map. Speaking of which, I want to take a look here. August 20th, 2018. Notice how much green there is, where the extent of the purple is. The depths are the colors. So the green is still 2.5 to 3 meters, which is almost 9 feet thick. And that yellow is approximately 12 feet thick. So remember, just a rough estimate for those of you in the States, 3 feet is a meter. I know it's not exact, but it's close. We can just get an easy baseline on that. And then if you look at the Arctic sea ice volume chart on the right, that black line is this year. Media needs to explain why we're so far above all these other years when they keep telling us it's going to go into all-time melt, and it hasn't. It's reversed. It's actually flipped. But keep your eye on how much green and yellow there is in the center. That's a thicker ice. Purple's the thinnest of the ice. And I'm going to bring you over here to last year. Pretty much the same time, 22nd of August, 2017. Notice how much more green there now is over the North Pole with that yellow that was not there even last year. The density along the Greenland coast as well as the Canadian coast, heavier last year, this year thinner, but notice where the ice had shifted right back up to the North Pole area. Now also, when I saw this area in northern Greenland, I thought I just did a video on the hot spots up there in the Arctic just 2 weeks ago. They have these anomalous hot spots where the water is 19, 20 degrees Celsius in the Arctic Circle. Well, those are underwater volcanoes. And there's 2 prolific spots showing at the moment, one off Svalbard, and I'll zoom it in for you. And that area on the map that they're referencing in the Guardian article, just go up and to the left where Greenland is, the top right there on that edge, that's where this ice article is based on. It's really close to where these volcanoes are erupting underwater. And interestingly, when you look at the mid-Atlantic ridge, see where a dog legs off and goes left, that's exactly where the ice losses are. They're referencing this article. They don't dare talk about these underwater volcanoes that could be the catalyst for the ice melt. Has to be wind, couldn't be anything else. And you see how many volcanoes are awakening globally, the amount of earthquakes. So if that mid-Atlantic ridge right there is starting to go off underwater and there's several volcanoes, what do you think it's going to do to the water temperature? Even in the Guardian article, they had to reference, it's science now. We are far above any of the least melt years. They're switching the narrative in front of your eyes. Take a look here. So far, 5.7 million square kilometers or 2.2 million square miles. Melt season ends in about 2 weeks or less. See where we go when we start to gain ice again. Sea ice concentrations. This is off NSIDC, the person that was referenced for the Guardian article here. You can go take a look through the site. I've linked everything below. They have a lot of interactive charts, dailies on the ice coverage. But I see a lot of white, and what white indicates in this chart is 100% coverage. So look how much white density there still is around the North Pole, exactly at 90 north, and all those other spots that are hot white, that's 100% ice coverage. Still. And you were told it was going to be an ice-free Arctic. Going to bring you over here from Polar Portal as well. This is off the OSI, linked below. You can check it out. But the way their coloration is, it gives you a different view in the density compared to what you saw from NSIDC charts. Because the way our eyes read this, it's just 2 different ways to look at the same information. And again, I will explain it to you as David Dilley explained it to me. The Atlantic water temperatures are cooling. This is where the water originates from that gets pushed into the Arctic Circle. And they call it a Arctic water pulse. Now this happens every 9 years. It's on a cycle as well. So you see where the dark red is, that's kind of the vein, if you will, the artery. And that's where the water originates from that gets pushed up in there. So if the water's cooler, significantly cooler, 3 to 4 degrees Celsius cooler, what do you think is going to happen with the ice? It's not going to melt, because a lot of that melt during the 1990s is because these water pulses were much warmer. The 1999 pulse was 1.2 C warmer than today's temperatures. So you got to realize just a 1.2 C drop has brought us right back into what? 7th or 8th least amount of ice. And then next year, we're just going to blow through everything and the narrative will have totally shifted. And we'll be right back into the medium baseline. And we'll have to explain that to you. But this is why it's happening. As the Atlantic water temperatures continue to cool, this water going up there is going to continue to be cooler. And when the Arctic freezes faster, you're going to get blasting Arctic fronts come down. And it's really going to affect and have extremely brutally cold winter this year. Next year's plural coming, and we're going into a grand solar minimum at this same time. The cycles, it's all about the cycles. These grand solar minimums are on 400-year cycles. This water pulse is on a 9-year cycle. And here we are. They have no explanation for the return of all the sea ice down in Antarctica. It's nearly at baseline again. Because if you're looking at this chart and you go to the west, you see that periphery. There's an enormous amount of ice on the western quadrant off Antarctica there. If you take all that ice that's growing above the baseline over there and start to fill in all those other little areas around, even down at the northeast, that section will fill in. They're actually at even or breaking through now the 30-year average, 1981 to 2010. Or they won't explain it to you in the media why. They'll just keep pushing the global warming narrative. But you see, the switch is in front of you right now. And we see switches like this in the media, call them out on it and say, wait a second, you need to explain it better. You fed us global warming all this time, and now you're switching the narrative, and see how they come back. I bet they block your comments or won't even respond. Thanks for watching. Hope you got something out of the video. Remember, Tri-Weekly Podcast, where I go into these very same type of subjects, delve into it. Episode number 91, talking about volcanic ash in the air at the moment, creating a global haze.